Okay, so I think let's get started then. It is Friday afternoon after all. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name again is Jennifer Howey. And I have been a physiotherapist for 18 years now, and I'm very fortunate to run Inside Out Physiotherapy and Wellness Group and a terrific team here in Toronto. So, just a bit of background about my past. I was presenting about 8 years ago at a CanFit Pro conference when I was approached by Gymstick Canada to develop a rehab component to their polling program. And I subsequently then helped Urban Polling and then Nordics Canada with development of their rehab programs. So in the end, what I've done is I've developed a Nordic Pole Walking course for rehab professionals that addresses all poles and aspects of pole walking. And the course itself has been always sponsored through Nordics Canada, so it's a fully accredited course. As a physiotherapist, I have always been passionate about being a strong clinician, passionate about connecting with my patients, and for the physiotherapy world, been very passionate about sponsoring continuing education and how we can work on our professional profile within the community. So with Nordic Pole Walking, what I've found is that it helped so many of my patients and those that of instructors that I've taught now throughout the years. It allows for research opportunities. It has really helped me build my profile and reputation with doctors and within the community. So I'm very excited to see the response that we've had for these webinars. And I really hope that over the next hour, I spark some interest in polling for you. And if you're already polling, I hope I educate and enlighten you on a few things. A few housekeeping points before we get started. One is, again, please keep your microphone muted. There's a number of people involved and it just gets too much background noise that would disturb the webinar for other people. I do encourage you to ask questions. Please complete those questions by typing in the chat box on the right-hand side of the screen, and I will get to all of those at the end of the presentation, and we'll address any questions you have. The other thing that I want to stress is today, this afternoon, you will receive a feedback form from us. And this is the first time we've connected through the webinar platform. So your feedback will be very important at shaping the future ones. So any input you have on that would be very valuable. The other thing is, we would really like to see what the background is again of the people that have been signed on and what your experience is with polling. We really believe in the community of pole walking and Nordic pole walking, so I would just like to help grow that. And if you have any technical difficulties during this presentation, please contact Peter Burrell and by email, peterburrell@aim.com. So my mantra, movement is life and life is movement. I'm speaking to rehab professionals, and so I don't need to convert the converted, but there is augmenting research nowadays on the impact of non-aggressive exercise and the fact that non-aggressive exercise is key to preventing a lot of comorbidities and helping us age healthy. There was even a big CBC presentation with one of the top neurologists on Alzheimer's disease, and they were saying that the highest level of evidence for prevention, number one, is actually non-aggressive exercise. So why Nordic pole walking? Nordic pole walking requires a moderate level of exertion. You can really push yourself with it, but you can also be fairly deconditioned and also get involved. So with that moderate level of exertion, though, you're using something that actually works on all the major components of our health. It has been shown to improve all aspects of one's fitness. It's a fantastic cross trainer. I use it a lot with my athletes. Strengthening the upper body. I'll have someone with frozen shoulder and I can't get them to do their exercises because it's so painful, I can actually get them out pulling, and they like it. It causes a pendular motion for the shoulder. The shoulder seems to respond really well, and they're doing something. And it's extremely cost effective. So why, as physiotherapists or rehab professionals, should we be interested? Well, it is the one tool that I've found every single discipline of physiotherapy can benefit from. And that for me is really exciting. If you look at the cardiac rehab, the majority of the initial research done on Nordic pole walking was all on oxygen level consumptions and heart and fitness. And they've been finding science that shows that every single aspect of one's fitness improves. Peri-joint replacements. Prior, you can keep people moving. It's less pressure on the joints, but it also works on the flexibility areas. It works on the muscle imbalances that we get over time because it causes the hips to take a longer stride. And so you're correcting problems prior to surgery. And then after surgery, we're able to get them up and moving and using a normal gait pattern very, very quickly. And then they've got a tool that they can take on for the rest of their lives. Posture, scoliosis, kyphosis. I've had a couple of patients who have come back to me, and honestly, they've done nothing more than really polling, and they've said that their doctors have told them they've increased in height because their scoliosis has improved so much. Neurological is very exciting for us as rehab therapists because I think we're embracing a lot of research in this area. I'm involved right now with a team in Hong Kong and getting physiotherapists there who are all starting to take over Parkinson's research and do it through the University of Hong Kong and Nordic Pole Walking. Post strokes, we have outpatient neuro at our clinic, and we use the poles extensively with that. Falls prevention. This is something I've started to train instructors for, especially in Northern Ontario, and I'd really like to start seeing more of it. It takes the strengthening and the balancing program that we do in sitting and standing through to movement and protected movement. So I think it's an area that's really exciting for that. And then I put this picture in the bottom left-hand corner because personally what I'd also like to see is us embrace it more with the athletic population. This originated as a cross trainer in Europe for their high-level cross-country ski teams. So this is actually a sport. And if you go to Europe, it is considered a sport. And I get so many athletes who don't run into as many injuries because they are cross-training with the poles. It's been proven, but you have a tenfold increase in the number of abdominal contractions and the number of back contractions in the same mile using poles than not using poles. So that it constantly gets them to activate their core. And then they find that when they're going into sport, their core is engaging and engaging naturally. So I think one thing I really want to do with this presentation is clarify what defines the different types of polling and what terminology we should be using. Because in Canada, we've been starting to interchange a lot of terminology, and I think it's important as researchers that we be clear on what we're talking about to the public. So pole walking itself. Pole walking is walking using poles. Underneath that umbrella, there are three categories. The first of those categories is Nordic pole walking. By definition, Nordic pole walking is a strapped pole technique. It is the original technique that was developed, and it is the one that is commonly used in Europe, Asia, and North America. The strapped poling or Nordic pole walking technique is characterized by an increased stride length, increased hip range of motion, less fatigue through the hands because you're meant to grip, transfer your force, and then release the pole. So it is designed so that the push through and support happens with a grip, plant, and release of the straps. Those are the characteristics of Nordic pole walking. The second category of pole walking is called the exerstrider method. In the exerstriding method, it is the strapless pole technique. This technique is almost exclusive to Canada and the United States. This technique is characterized by a shorter stride length, a higher arm position, and a continuous grip of the pole. By definition, those are the characteristics. A further adaptation of this is the activator method. The activator method is an adaptation of the strapless poling technique. This technique is characterized by the arms being at 90 degrees, very minimal stride length, and the use of bell boot tips. The reason why I want to clarify this and stress this is because, especially as physiotherapists, we're evidence-based professionals, and we need to be clear about how we're communicating to the public and communicating when we do research. In Canada, we seem to be interchanging these two techniques and the terminology very nonchalantly, and we're starting to be criticized by the international community, in particular about research. For example, there's been studies that have concluded Nordic pole walking and post-lung surgery, and they might be a very well done study, but they conclude that the results are different than the other studies they've read on Nordic pole walking. But if you look at the study more closely, the study used the activator pole. You would never expect those same results with Nordic pole walking. So that incorrect title is starting to create confusion internationally, and they're saying, well, that wasn't Nordic pole walking, but what pole was used? And so if you are doing research in particular, what is important is that if you decide to use a strapless poling technique, that's fine, but you have to say, pole walking study using the exerstrider method and its effects on lung cancer patients. You need to be clear in how you're communicating. We also can't assume that because Nordic pole walking research says something that we can extrapolate that same benefit to people in a strapless pole technique. That hasn't been proven yet in the literature. And you don't say the benefits of race biking and then have the person use a mountain bike. So I just want to clarify that because over the last number of years, I've been seeing that this confusion is starting to increase. So the next series of slides then, I'm going to talk about what's been shown in Nordic pole walking technique because it is the one that's internationally got the most science behind it. So with Nordic pole walking, what they have found is that all of these extra muscles in blue are muscles that are activated as soon as you push through the strap and the hand to activate your core and your lats and your arm muscles. It's making you that much taller. In Germany, this is how they demonstrated the previous caricature. In Germany, this is an excellent study, and what I want to show you is this is a PET study. So what they've done is they've injected dye into people, and then that gets taken up by oxygen in the body. So it gives you a measure of blood flow and it gives you a measure of muscle activity. And if you look, there's a column at the left that is a person at rest, a column in the middle that is a walker, and then a column at the end that is a Nordic pole walker. If you look at the bottom line, that's a non-active person. In the middle is a moderately active person, and then the top is an athlete. So what you can see is as soon as you put poles in someone's hands, even the non-active person, look at the increase in activity that you have. That is all those 40% extra muscles that get engaged. And if you look at the buttock area, look in particular at the buttock area for us rehab professionals, you'll see the blue that's there? One of our biggest dilemmas in our practice is that we can get people to do Pilates. We can get them to do all the strengthening of their buttock muscles, but they'll still walk out of your clinic and they're not actually activating them in movement. And it's us getting them to try to activate them in movement. Well, look at what happens with the poles. As soon as you put poles in someone's hands, they start activating their glutes. And if you look at the moderately active person, look at the increase in muscle activity of that person. It's really exciting. So when it comes to the clinical evidence of Nordic pole walking, there have been studies. This again came from the high-level athletes in Europe. Because it was that population, it has actually been studied in kinesiology labs and university labs and medical labs for years. So that's the other thing that I really like about this product, is that it is something that has got true science behind it. There's no gimmick involved here. So to highlight a few, and if you do take the Nordic Pole Walking Rehab course, you do get a background of a series of articles and a lot of background research. But just to highlight a few points, on average, you can expect a 35 to 40% load reduction on the hips and knees with the Nordic Pole Walking. Both the Exerstrider method and Nordic Pole Walking have shown benefits for seniors and benefits for breast cancer patients. In Europe, there's so much support and evidence for Nordic Pole Walking and diabetes patients that you're actually sponsored for your diabetics meds in Germany if you do pole walk. And the other thing is, again, the neuropopulation. There's a lot of research constantly being done on that, of which we're going to highlight one article in a moment. But one of my points I want to say here is that, so when you are actually helping someone, let's say, improve from an ankle sprain faster because you're going to give them poles so they can get up and get moving and have some of that weight taken off their ankle, look at all the other things that you're impacting their quality of life with just by simply introducing them to poles. I understood that there was going to be a number of neurophysios involved with the webinars this session, so I wanted to highlight a couple areas of research. One of them is Parkinson's disease. There have been a number of studies that have been done using both the Exerstrider method and the Nordic Pole Walking method, but this is one that came out in 2011, and it's kind of a neat study. What they did was they took 90 patients with Parkinson's disease, and for 6 months they put them on quite an extensive program, 3 times a week for 70 minutes. And they did 3 treatment groups. One was a flexibility relaxation program that was very popular with the Parkinson's disease. The second group did a walking program, and the third group did the same walking program, but they did it Nordic Pole Walking. So the results showed that the Nordic Pole Walking showed a greater improvements in postural stability, stride length, and gait pattern. So the other interesting thing was that patients continued to Nordic Pole Walk after the study concluded. And what was funny was that they wanted to actually get a control group because they wanted to see how long the benefits lasted once they stopped the pole walking program. So they tried to get them to stop, and they couldn't do that part of the study because they weren't able to get a control group. For those interested in doing research, this is a really good article to get you started. It was a large systematic review that was done and presented in the Scandinavian Journal of Science and Sports in 2012. And it looked at all 368 studies that had been done previous to that on Nordic Pole Walking. It narrowed it down to the fact that there were 14 random control trials and ones that met the strict inclusion criteria. They said often that was because we didn't have double-blind groups with clinical subjects. But some of the trends that they found with this was that in most of the research articles, research studies that have been done, the age range tended to be from mid to older adults. The frequency of the prescribed treatment was often 2 to 3 times a week, and it ranged from 20 minutes to 70 minutes. The interesting thing they did point out, though, was that all studies showed a minimum of one positive improvement with pole walking over regular walking. All studies showed that. They did stress the need to clarify the technique used, and they said that in particular North American research were again interchanging it, and they said you need to clarify what technique was used in the study. And then they said that we need to find better population-specific outcome measures, and that the future there wasn't a lot on balance or upper extremity data. So let's discuss the Nordic pole walking technique. Now we're at the exciting part. So why are the hand straps key? This is because the hand straps allow for power transfer through the pole. They also allow you to have a grip and a release of the pole, and that is critical because it allows for a contraction and a relaxation phase of the upper traps. In the exostrider method, you constantly have to grip the pole, and some of the force plate studies that have been done to date have shown that they don't have the same relaxation phase of the upper traps. They are safe to use. There is some thought out there that the strap makes things more unstable because or at risk of hand injuries. You're not skiing, you're not downhill skiing. And there was one study internationally that did look at the risk of hand injuries, and it actually found a 0.02% chance of thumb injury using Nordic pole walking. And so they basically concluded it's like any possibility of an accident, you could have an accident with Nordic pole walking. And in fact, Nordic pole walking has been recognized in 2013 as by the International Osteoporosis Society as quote unquote a safe sport for patients at high risk of osteoporotic fractures. Now, when I have someone come into the clinic and come for a free info session, I really want them poling. So if they've come and they've brought me poles they were given, or they've brought me poles that they've had for years, then I really want to try to see if we can make those work for them. The first thing that I always look at is the height of the pole. The pole, and we will get into this when I demonstrate in a couple moments, but the pole has to be adjustable. It has to be able that we can adjust it so it can get and promote a normal walking pattern. The second thing is the straps, but if they do have strapless poles, I'll say, well, let's give those a try and we can, see how they like that and how that works. But the third thing that I'm quite strict on is the boot tip. Nordic pole walking is meant to promote a normal gait pattern. So the pole is out with the foot beside it or slightly behind, but it's meant to rock at the same time as the foot does. So that's why it's an angled boot tip. And what happens is when we use a bell tip is fine while it is beside us, right beside us, and we have a minimal gait pattern. But as soon as you go to use that pole through a significant movement, look at what happens in the bottom left-hand picture to the surface area contact. It decreases exponentially, and it puts that person at a high risk of the pole coming and slipping out underneath someone. So even in a minimal stride, you can still use an angled boot tip because it constantly provides a decent amount of surface area contact. But the bell tips you have to be very careful for. And some of the true hiking poles that are meant to be in the mountains, and that's when the pole is meant to be beside you. Some of the cheaper versions of poles from Canadian Tire and things like that, you'll see this flat bell tip. And also, if they happen to have used activator poles at some point, then when they get to moving, I'm like, you've got to get your boot tips on there because you want angled boot tips so that you prevent this risk of injury. So the stabilizer pole. Basically, what happened is throughout the last number of years now of working with patients and different instructors around the country, what we found was that there was this increased thought amongst the rehab community that a pole would be safer if it had a button lock system. And also, we found that if a patient is post-stroke, let's say, or had one side of their hands that might have a lot of arthritis or something, that a button lock system is also easier to set up than a twist lock system, which is standard with walking poles. We also started to find that there were often times in rehab where we might want to do the strapless technique for a short time and then eventually progress that person to the strapped technique. So, for example, a total knee arthroplasty, they might be poling prior. Then they have their surgery. And then in the first 6 to 7 days after their knee replacement, to get up and use the poles, they wanted a sense of having something more sturdy. But then by week 4 or 5, they're ready to go back to the strap technique. And we didn't want to have to charge that person to have to be buying 2 poles. So what ended up happening was we started to work with Nordics Canada and say, can we do a multi-purpose pole? And so what happened was that we came up with a design. And the exciting part about this too is that the final 2 prototypes were brought to last year's Canadian Physiotherapy Association conference in Victoria. And physios actually tested out the poles and walked with the different prototypes. And then they voted. And it was actually based on their votes that the final prototype was selected. So that's just kind of exciting. The pole itself is a slightly thicker pole. It does have this button lock system for that increased sense of stability and making it slightly easier to size. The grip is a slightly more ergonomic grip. We wanted to have something that was slightly larger with a sense of end to it for moments when you'd want to use the axis strider method. But we didn't want it too thick because too thick of a pole has been associated with hand and grip fatigue. And we also don't want to we wanted something that continued to be a smooth action once they go back to using the pole in the true Nordic pole walking technique. And it's suitable for the rehab and also active population. To be honest, I love this new grip. And so that's one of my poles of choice to go out poling with. So now what we're going to do is we're going to switch to the camera, and I'm going to show you all how sort of the size of poles and the basic technique. So I'm going to have Peter help me out a bit with this too, and we'll just turn the camera. Welcome everybody. Hello, hello. So sizing the poles. The goal when we Nordic pole walk is that we want to have the arm out promoting a normal gait pattern. So you want to have it at roughly a handshake position. So what happens is you want to have the arm angled at 90 degrees. And then at the beginning, you want it angled at 90 degrees and then minus about 2 inches. Okay. As the person gets better with their pole walking, then they'll start to take a longer stride. Once they start taking a longer stride with their legs and with their arms, that's when you can raise the pole higher to meet that increase in arm stride length. So you would raise it as the person gets better to 90 degrees. You would never go higher than 90 degrees. You cannot have a good and normal walking pattern with your arm up here. So you never go higher than 90. It's 90 degrees minus about 2 inches. I'm going to get closer to just show you the straps. So the straps for Nordics poles, there is a right and a left, and your hand just slips in through, and then you do the strap up. The strap is meant to not be on the wrist. It's on the hyperthenar eminence or on the pad of the hand. The boot tips themselves, the boot tips are again meant to help propel you. So they always point down or point behind. I like to say the boot tips point behind. So now we're going to go to the next slide, and I'm just going to adjust myself here. And I'm going to show you the general technique. So Nordic pole walking, it's an exaggeration of normal walking. So the movement, I'll just wait for the camera. The movement is from the shoulder. It's the opposite arm and leg motion, opposite arm and leg motion, opposite arm and leg motion. And what I'm doing is I'm propelling myself forward. I'm using the strap and the pole to get my trunk activated, to get me nice and tall for pushing through the pole. And it's that push through the pole that is critical. So to break that down a bit further, the first step, we'll just slip to the next slide. The first step is a plant and a push through the strap and the pole. So as my foot comes forward, my pole plants at the same time, and I push, and then I grip, and then I come through. As it passes my hip, we'll slip to the next slide. That's when I release the pole, and I naturally swing it forward to plant again. So again, it becomes a plant, come through, passes by the hip, and I'm just waiting for the camera to adjust here, and throw through again. So again, you plant the pole, come through, and then release the pole. Now, as far as releasing the pole, that will come over time. What we find is many people still like to grip the pole, but they're not gripping it. They are just touching it. They're just guiding it. So coming through, 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 through. So you, again, plant, release, plant, release. Okay? And what you can see, I'll just come close, is that you can actually maneuver the poles with 3 fingers. Okay? You do not need to grip the pole. You actually maneuver, and when you plant the pole, my thumb is soft and my pinky soft, and I'm just pushing through the strap, and I'm making my body tall. And then as I come through, I then pass by my hip, I release the pole, and then I would swing it forward again for the next plant. Again, hard to demonstrate. They're not allowed to, you can't do videos with webinars, but at least it gives you a good introduction. If you go to our website, you will see there is a demonstration of the Nordic pole walking technique, and the steps also are there. But when you take the course, it's all taught to you in the 6 steps. So now we'll just get back to the presentation for a moment. So again, Nordic pole walking then, it's an exaggeration of normal walking. The movement happens from the shoulder. The opposite arm and leg motion, which is what I think actually impacts and helps people out so much, because as we age, we stop moving through our trunk, and the pole walking really promotes that walking movement through the trunk. The body is long, and you want to get that nice range of motion from the hip joint. So at this point, I just actually want to acknowledge Dr. Klaus Schwanbeck. Klaus was the author of the international top seller on book on pole walking, which is called the Nordic Pole Walking book. And then subsequently, he released the Ultimate Nordic Pole Walking book. Both of those are available on Amazon, and they're excellent resources if you're looking into learning and the technique even further. Um, Klaus was a wonderful inspiration, and he really wanted to bring pole walking to Canada and really promote Canadians to be more active and work with the other polling companies to try to get it passed. He really was trying to advocate for poles to be covered in the country. And so a lot of the references you've seen as far as the technique and things like that, they're from his book and they're from him. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago, and the current president, Greg Bellamy, is taking the company to the next level. So, physiotherapy opportunities. So just to summarize again, clinically, the patient satisfaction is high level. If I can't get patients to do their exercises, I can get them to take poles and go for a walk for 20 minutes. So it's very effective. Motor vehicle accidents, the auto insurers are all taking poles now as part of their treatment plans. They're taking classes, anything from group classes to some private classes. And again, falls prevention programs, there's lots of opportunities. I've trained a few instructors lately for the GLAD. The GLAD is the latest program out of Denmark for total knee arthroplasties and preventing people needing to have knee replacements. And they're starting to look at using Nordic Pole Walking as the home exercise program for that population, because you've got the 40% less pressure on the knee joints. Again, seniors homes, cardiac rehab, it's very cost effective, and it's wonderful for the patients. The other thing is research. Again, it's relatively easy to study. We're very excited. As a private clinic, we actually ran a pilot study that we're hoping to present next year. And we took our clients and we had them partake, and we did an assessment of their level of fitness, and then put them on an 8-week program, and then reassessed their areas of fitness using different measurements. So it allows a lot of research to be done, both clinical and empirical. Marketing, it's fantastic. I've taught a lot of clinics, and then they've gone and made t-shirts, and they've gone and entered into runs. Nordic Pole Walking is now a category for all the major walks and runs. Again, specialists are starting to show an interest and starting to know where they can refer clients for classes and for programs. So we see a lot more now of where do I get the poles versus where's the snow, where I used to get that. And then as a business, I am a physiotherapist. I run a clinic at Bay and Bloor. I also need to be a businesswoman, and I like to consider myself an entrepreneurial philanthropist. I think physios are like this, where we're driven to do good, but we also want to make a profit too. The poles, especially if you become an instructor with Nordics, they allow for you to sell them, and potentially through your clinic, you can make a little bit of money. Or we've had departments at hospitals that have used them to help subsidize different things. And then you have the option to just have the drugstore in the hospital carry them or something too. And then also, even from a marketing perspective for private clinic owners, we'll often have someone that will come to our classes, and then they'll say, oh, I've got this shoulder problem for years that I've never gotten fixed before. So where do we go? Well, there is a technique involved, and my 2-second demonstration does not do it justice. The top left-hand corner, there's so many things incorrect with that picture, and I see people walking like this all the time. There is a technique involved. If you look at the picture in the top left-hand corner, if she was actually to walk with the pole out in front like that, look at what's happening with the angle of forces around her knee joint, for example. she's actually creating a hyperextension moment around that knee joint. And what that's doing is increasing the force and the compression of her knee joint. If you look at the correct technique in the bottom picture, the pole is falling slightly behind the foot, and that is creating a flexion angle at the knee joint. And then that flexion is how you're getting the decrease in force through the joints. So there is a definite need to have the instruction. As far as the Nordic Pole Walking Instructors course for rehab professionals, if you are out of province, do look into either the Nordics Canada website does have instruction or have links to the distributors in those provinces, and they often have links to training programs that are there. In Ontario, the next course is scheduled for January the 27th here in Toronto. Yes, we have baskets, and we do polling in the winter. If that's too cold for you, there is another one May 5th, and all the information is on our website for that. I have been all over the country hosting courses, so if you are interested in having me come to do a course, then just feel free again to contact us or fill it on the feedback form. And then we are toying with the idea of doing more of a webinar-based course. Mostly it's been international instructors we have been training, but it's not ideal, but we do a webinar-based course with teaching the technique through the web, and you get the same information sent to you prior, and then you have to send me a video of you pole walking so that I can at least evaluate you as well. So there's different ways of getting involved, and just so that you know, they're all sponsored by Nordics Canada, so they're fully accredited courses, and that you also get an ongoing discount for you or your facility for the poles. So just to learn about the foot poles a little bit more, they retail between $70 and $90. Again, there's wholesale pricing, there's the instructor pricing, which is significantly less than that. And so if you're interested in any of that stuff, then please feel free to just contact Peter Burrell, and the information is there through Inside Out Physiotherapy and Wellness Group. So I'm going to open up now for questions. I really hope you've learned a lot today and that I've helped you out, and that if you're interested in polling, I love it. I just want everybody polling. You'll get some benefit out of pole walking no matter what you're doing, and I'm just really excited to share this with and to see it get bigger both in the community and in the physiotherapy community. So now we'll just open it up to questions. Hi. So Tina says she's a physiotherapist from Ottawa and she works in the community. She's new to pole walking. Wonderful. I believe there is actually a Nordics. If you go onto Nordics website, there is someone in Ottawa that is involved with a lot with the polling community, and I'm sure she would be great at helping you out. Hello. So I've been asked a question about rotator cuff injuries and Nordic pole walking for rehab. That's an excellent question. Rotator cuff injuries can be tricky because some of the initial exercises can often flare them. The one thing that happens in pole walking is that you activate the upper traps. And that's actually a muscle that is involved in setting the shoulder correctly and opening up the shoulder, because you actually get co-contraction, especially if you're using the Nordics poles, of the upper and the lower traps. And that's involved in setting the shoulder correctly. So I have found that some patients actually do well if they have rotator cuff injury. I find that you have to watch their technique and make sure that they are doing upright technique. They're not taking as long of a stride, and that they're really pushing through the whole body and the trunk. I have had a couple that have run into some shoulder issues, but they were training for the half marathon using the poles. And again, what ended up happening was they were sort of like this instead of being open. And once we corrected the technique, they started running into less problems. But I do find my shoulders tend to respond actually quite well to the poles. And I think it's because of the pendular activity. And I think that it's because of the contract and the release of the upper traps you're actually getting. And I just also wanted to mention, I can mention a few distributors. We're excited to have some of them online today. So Larry Wong is from Richmond, BC. So if you go onto the Nordics website, his contact information will be there, and that's great. And also Bill Graham has done a wonderful job in the East Coast for promoting the polling with the rehab community, and he and his wife Esther. So again, go on to the Nordics. It's just www.nordics.com, or send us an email. We will connect you to them as well. How do you use the pole in the snow? I went out for an hour yesterday morning and I loved it. I actually love it in the winter time. Two reasons. One is if you are in ground that's icy, and especially again, my older patients too, you pull off the boot tips and you've got a carbide spike there. And so yes, you might not propel as fast forward, but you're consistently walking. So the spikes allow for you to keep going in quite icy terrain or that risky kind of terrain. But the other thing is that in the heavy snow is there's snow baskets, and snow baskets are actually created to help the snow go through so that the pole can keep it. It's like like a traditional ski pole ski basket. And so snowshoeing is actually a very, very popular thing to use the Nordic poles for. So we have a question about learning to put on the straps for seniors with wearing gloves is difficult for seniors who are 70 to 95 years of age. Yes. Now, so wearing gloves, yes. If you have somebody to help you put them on, if you're wearing gloves, it does help. What I sometimes try to do is almost attach uh, the glove to the strap, and then so that they just have to slip their hand actually inside the glove. I've done that before. Um, and it is almost like any other piece of equipment, though. Sometimes tying a pair of skates can be precarious. It's you have to kind of play with it. But the wider straps, that's where the wider straps are a bit more useful, is in the wintertime with the gloves. And then, but generally speaking, I kind of just play with it, and you have to just kind of play with it. But sometimes what I've found is I've just slipped the glove on and then had the strap on loose, so it's all attached to the pole, and then I'm just slipping the hand into it. Again, though, too, sometimes that can be where if they have the stabilizer pole, they might feel more comfortable to not have the strap. Again, so you can see, just use the strap with the pole without the straps. You sort of got more connectivity, though, if you have straps as a possibility. Yes. If you're dealing with a series of seniors, sometimes they're saying about time consuming for setting things up. Again, that's one of the reasons why we found the advantage to the stabilizer pole, because the stabilizer pole is a quick setup. It's just a button, click them up, and then you do have the option, depending on what environment you're using them in, at least even the first couple of times, of trying the strapless technique to get them used to it, and then they can as they get more adept to the polling, they can try to get their hands in the straps. Generally speaking, though, it's quite interesting. Like I've had a lady from Sweden come in once, and she was 86, and she's came in and she said, "I have to buy a set of poles." She said, "I didn't pack mine with me," and she said, "I'm here for 3 weeks, and I've just realized that I can do it here." And so I think the more that the people practice it and get used to it, it becomes more natural. Any other questions? Any other questions? We have a few more minutes. Anyone from a clinic or a facility where they're using, wanting to use the poles, or interested in knowing more about some aspect of polling that I might not have dealt with? So there is a question about boot tips. So it's a very good question. Boot tips. So boot tips are rubber based, and so for example, on the Nordic boot tips, but most boot tips, they have a rigid pattern to the bottom of the boot tip. That rigid pattern might go relatively quickly, but there is still a lot of life left in that boot tip. And the fact that it actually goes is not necessarily a bad thing, because it means that the rubber is absorbing some of the shock. Okay. If the boot tip is not of a good quality rubber, then it will sometimes crack. And so the fact that it does wear is not necessarily a bad thing, and you still have a decent amount of life in that boot tip. We'll use the boot tips for a significant amount prior to replacing them. Boot tips can also give you, especially as a therapist, a lot of information, because they will uh, if they wear more on one side than the other side, then you know that that person is not is trying to push and rely on that arm more than they are activating the opposite leg. So sometimes looking at the boot tips can actually give you an idea of how they're trying to use the pole. And if they're trying to fall to that side too much, then what you might want to encourage them is to be taller through their spine, and to take the pressure through their body versus through the pole. So wear and tear on boot tips can actually tell you a fair bit. And you know what? Boot tips are only a couple of dollars each anyways to replace, and often they're the one thing that people need to get throughout the time of having poles. Um, Okay, so and I also forgot to just mention too that in Victoria there is I believe, Linda is the distributor. So again, if anyone wants to know across the country, then feel free to get in touch with us. So I look forward to hearing from you in the feedback form. Please let me know what your thoughts are, and I thank you for your time. Take care and have a great weekend.